Good morning and evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. So I'm honored to welcome Dr. Lindsey Raymond from Microsoft Research, who will be presenting her work on generative AI at work. So without further delay, please join me in welcome Dr. Raymond, and please take it away.
Great. Well, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you guys for having me. So I will be talking about generative AI at work, which is joint work with Eric Brynjolfsson and Danielle Lee. So computers have transformed work over the past 2 decades. So the way computers traditionally have worked is that you provided a set of inputs and a set of instructions or a mapping that takes that input and transforms the output you desire. And this means computers can reliably and cheaply and very rapidly execute tasks we have explicit instructions for, like math. And so that has really transformed the economy, because doing math rapidly and cheaply and very precisely, more precisely than humans, as we've seen over the past 20 years, has changed a lot of, the way we do work, the sort of, even if we don't necessarily use computers directly, the way we communicate with other people, so on and so forth. But one thing that has really limited where computers could have played a role is the need to have a set of instructions. So here, to program a computer, you literally need that sequence of instructions. So that works well for something like math, but for something like, writing a professional email where it's not obvious what this sort of set of instructions is, that is limited where computers traditionally played a role. Now, machine learning is not just a deepening of that prior wave of information technology. It's really a whole new approach to building a computer. So instead of requiring a set of instructions with machine learning, we give a set of examples and a set of the desired output. And then the algorithm is a procedure to learn how to go from the inputs to output. So it actually learns that mapping. And this is very exciting because there are a lot of tasks where we don't know that f of x, such as that writing a professional email example, but actually just giving computers lots of examples seems to work really well in getting the computer to do something like that. And the fact that there's so many tasks like this that are kind of very important is known as Poyani's paradox. And so in this paper, we're going to think about generative AI, which is a specific type of machine learning that just uses this procedure to generate new types of output. And we're going to ask, how does access to generative AI improve productivity? Basically, in the wild, not in some very strict lab-based setting, where we have a lot of control over the set of questions that are asked. It's a very short-term study. Does this type of tool actually improve something like productivity? And then beyond asking, does generative AI work in doing sort of a task that it couldn't, that computers weren't able to do before? We're going to try to understand what are the other differences of rolling out a tool like this in a workplace. Now, why should we be sort of skeptical of this? So when we started, Eric and I started writing the paper in 2020. This is a very different sort of period in terms of right now, generative AI, there's a lot of hype behind it. But basically at that time, one, there's always just this big gulf between how technology performs in the lab and how it performs in the real world. But also, many of these generative AI tools are designed to augment people, so give suggestions to people. And we were coming off of a period where we had shown that these type of augmentation devices, it was often very hard to combine them accurately with people. So we had a lot of evidence that the sort of traditional decision support tools that gave, say, like a child protective service worker a risk score to help them sort of understand how risky a call might be, when you actually combine the human and the algorithm, they often did worse than either the human alone or the algorithm alone. So this is a very robust finding in the decision support literature. And so in general, going into a setting where you're trying to combine a human and a generative AI tool, there was just a lot of skepticism that it would work well. And then I think more specifically to this technology, so in addition to the normal issues with technology transforming it, going into the real world, generative AI tools, when they don't necessarily know the correct answer, they can still produce output, and it will be very coherent seeing, but inaccurate output. And you can imagine that's a real problem if you're actually using this in a real business setting. And so kind of, as I said, we're not only going to say, does generative AI actually work to improve productivity? We're also going to take advantage of looking at how this tool changes the experience of work, looking at customer side effects over a longer time horizon. And so today I'm going to talk about the productivity results. I'm going to talk about some of the differences in how the effects vary across workers by tenure and skill. And then again, probably touch on some of this experience of work. So I'll be talking about this in customer support, and we'll be looking at an AI assistant that's going to give suggestions to workers that's built on GPT-3. So at this time, again, this paper, most of our analysis is going to take place over 2020, 2021. So, obviously an older version of GPT-3. And then we're going to take advantage of the fact that we're going to have this staggered rollout of the tool across about 5,000 agents. And all of these agents work for a Fortune 500 software company that I'll tell you more about in a couple slides. So just to give you a sense of where I'm going, we're going to find fairly large productivity effects. And here, productivity in the customer support setting means the number of issues, like the number of technical support issues an agent can resolve per hour. So we have very well measured outcomes in the call center setting, which is one of the nice features of that. We're going to find that these effects are really driven by the less experienced and less skilled workers. So I'm going to show you some graphs that show how the AI tool basically changes the productivity experience curve. And you're going to see that all of these productivity effects, they're going to have very strong monotonic patterns where the less skilled or less experienced workers see big gains, and then the most experienced, most skilled workers often see small negative effects. And then lastly, this experience of work aspect, this will start to get into the mechanism behind these productivity effects, like why exactly are we seeing these gains? And so we'll spend a little bit of time on that. And then, by the way, feel free to interrupt with questions as I'm talking. Okay, so before I get to the results, I'm going to talk a little bit about the chatbot that we're studying here, and then the data and study design. So kind of why customer support? Broadly, this is an area which has one of the highest surveyed rates of AI adoption, particularly generative AI adoption. And that's because just as part of business as usual, call centers transcribe all conversations. Many are chat-based conversations now, so that's why the term is now contact center instead of call center. And in this setting, you actually have a fair amount of good outcomes already. So the call centers already track how long a call takes, whether or not an issue was resolved in the support case, so on and so forth. So that basically means there's a lot of training data here for various AI tools. At the same time, it's an area where there's a lot of turnover among workers. It's like 60 to 80% every year. So basically, you have to kind of hire a completely new set of workers every year. So basically, but at the same time, it's doing this job, and particularly doing technical support for the firm we're looking at is fairly knowledge intensive, and workers do take a while to get up to speed. You or I would not be very good at doing this on day one. And so there's basically a real business interest in anything that can kind of help workers get up to speed more quickly. And then kind of also, as I said, this is an area where to do this job, you do need some computer and accounting knowledge. The accounting knowledge is specific to the setting we're studying. But also it's really an area where you couldn't simply like come up with a rules-based system to be a good chatbot, because there's a lot of like customer care, social interaction, dealing with customer frustrations that happens. And that's, one of those tasks where it's not obvious how you would like come up with a very clear set of like if-then statements that sort of dealt with a frustrated customer. So in a contact center, agents sit in front of a screen like this. So we're only going to be looking at chat-based agents. And that's just simply so we can capture basically all of the data. And on the left, there's this queue of customers. In our setting, the company the agents are working for sells business process software accounting to small businesses in the US. So all the customers are like small business owners based in the US. They have this chat box in the middle where they're interacting with the customer. And then on the right, some information. There's an internal like Wikipedia for technical resources that they can access, and so on and so forth. And this is kind of fairly stressful because, one, often most people interact with tech support, particularly when something is going wrong, and so generally fairly stressed. And here, most of the questions are things like, I can't run payroll on my employees, I need help figuring out. So just in general, even more stressful topics than the norm. And so within this interaction, there's like a couple of specific underlying pieces of structure that make this a good ML problem. So first, the first part of the conversation is trying to diagnose what the underlying problem is. So basically, is the underlying problem exactly what the person is saying is going wrong, or is it something else? So for instance, someone might be saying, I can't find this feature on my computer, computer installed software, but it's possible that they didn't pay for a version of the software with that feature. So the kind of agent has to distinguish. And this in general takes most of the conversation. I don't know if you've done tech support for your parents, but this is kind of like when I've done it, this is certainly what's taken the longest time. And basically, good agents here are very good at kind of asking a set of directed questions. And that's really a pattern matching exercise. So like taking this sort of semantic content of how someone describes a problem and matching it. And then once you have that, predicting the right solution, and this is, again, fairly standard like prediction question. And then this other aspect, which is kind of like recognizing, how do I communicate in ways to alleviate customer frustration? And so our AI system is going to start from a version of GPT-3. So this underlying version is going to allow us to take advantage of all of the like pre-trained language that is in GPT-3. And we're going to do a couple of things to like fine tune it to the specifics of the setting. So we're going to take a large number of historical conversations from our setting, and we're going to label each conversation with outcomes. So in call centers, as I said before, it's kind of how quickly a call lasts, call duration, whether or not the technical issue was resolved or not, the surveyed customer satisfaction. So these are like the surveys that you annoyingly get after you interact with customer support. And then whether or not the agent was a high performer or not. And then we're going to kind of do a couple of additional rounds of fine tuning. And what the model is trying to basically maximize call duration or minimize call duration while maximizing resolution and customer satisfaction. And then the high performer. So there's as a lot of aspects of being a good call center worker that are not captured by those outcomes. So like top performers are very good at asking those diagnostic questions. Each company often has like a specific tone, how they want agents to interact with their customers, like different levels of formality, so on and so forth. And so by adding the label for the high performer, that's helping the model kind of pick up on that semantic content and some of those like skills, like asking good questions that don't have an explicit label. And that's a really important part of building a good model. And then kind of there's going to be just some additional fine tuning with human feedback done at the end. And this is also just simply to make sure that the model has, a set of appropriate responses for workplace environment. And so kind of all together, I think I want to emphasize that, the GPT-3 is really important, but there's a huge amount of work that goes on in steps 2 and 3 that are really important to making this kind of work well. And what this system will produce are real-time text suggestions or suggested links to technical material. I'll show you that on the next slide. And the worker, these are shown just to the worker. So the worker has full discretion over whether or not to accept or reject a suggestion or edit it in some way. This is kind of consistent with a lot of the co-pilots that we've seen, same setup. So on the left here, this is just one, this is kind of a sample chat where the agent, whose name is Chris in this stylized example, is greeting the customer who's describing their problem. And then on the right of the slide, below the chat box, the AI will suggest two suggested responses. And here, they're just really different ways to greet the client. So one is, I completely understand, Alex. I can definitely assist you with this. Can you provide the email associated with the account? The other one is a little bit more like, I'm going to, here's what I'm going to do to help you with the problem. And these are just AI-generated suggestions that are correlated with successful outcomes, like having good customer satisfaction, resolving the call quickly, so on and so forth. And so here, just very much like kind of tonal recommendations about establishing a friendly rapport with the customer. The AI can also surface links to technical documentation. So later on during the conversation, as it's kind of processing, it will surface like, this is the link to the technical documentation that describes the problem I think is the customer is facing in this call. So basically, it's kind of like a very smart directed search for the agent, where they're going to see that article that says, how do you solve user like locked out of their account? They can look at that article, and then that will help them address the problem much more quickly. And then again, these are all just shown to the agent. Okay. So now we'll talk a little bit more about the data. So we kind of have an idea of the setting, how the AI works. We're going to be looking at 3 million customer service chats between 2020 and 2021. We're going to have about 5,000 agents in our sample over that period. About 1,500 are going to receive access to the AI in this staggered rollout. And in contact centers, there's a little bit of an interesting employment structure. So there are some call center agents who are directly employed by our data firm, so the Fortune 500 company, but call centers are really outsourced. So there are also 4 outsourcing firms that contract with our data firm to supply call center agents. So we're going to have agents that are employed across 5 companies total, all working for this data firm. And some of the outsourced agents, among all agents, the majority of them are located in the Philippines, and then kind of the remaining 15% are located in the US. For each call, we're going to see the text of the conversations. We're going to see their adherence to the AI suggestions. We're going to see how long a call takes. And then at the agent month level, we're going to get the average call resolution. We're going to have the average call resolution rate, surveyed customer satisfaction rate, so on and so forth. On the right, I'm showing you a graph which shows you the share of agents onboarded over time. So in the summer of 2020, there was a small 50-agent randomized control trial where half the agents were given the AI, compared to half who were not. We analyze that RCT separately in the paper, but it's kind of not going to talk about that now. Our results are very similar. Then over the fall and winter, we had this very long rollout, and that was kind of shaped by two factors. So before any agent had AI recommendations turned on for them, they had to attend a training session. And that's just because obviously if you're going to like kind of disrupt the call center workers' flow, you need to teach them how to use the AI recommendations. And the training sessions were run by basically 3 people at our AI firm, the firm that built the AI product. And they were people who previously had actually worked or ran a call center, but also like had a very deep familiarity with how the product worked. But they also had kind of full-time jobs. So the training sessions were kind of scheduled intermittently around their availability. And they would just hold like a virtual session for 100 or so agents. They would do a 3-hour session on like how to integrate the AI into their workflow, how to understand what the different types of output were, what if something goes wrong, what are some troubleshooting tips, so on and so forth. Now, at the same time, the data firm, the firm who purchased this AI, at the time, generative AI was like very, very unproven. And so they said, we're going to allocate a certain amount of budget, kind of like such that, 50 to 60% of active agents are covered. We're going to buy that amount of AI product, and then we'll reevaluate next year, depending on how much we sort of what issues came up when we were using it, so on and so forth. So basically, the kind of scheduling constraints and the budget constraint dictated the rollout structure we see here. The way agents were assigned, so like how were agents allocated into receiving the AI versus not? The goal was basically there was some number of agents that were allocated across the main company and the outsourcing company. And the rollout happened at the individual agent level. So within a team, in the fall, kind of 5% of agents within a team on average had access to the AI, kind of slowly cropped up over time. And it was about 73% at the end of the spring. And the reason why you had that kind of individual level rollout instead of the team level rollout was just to kind of minimize disruption. So broadly, if you had said, let's give an entire team AI access, that would have like meant the entire team would have had to go to this 3-hour training session. There would be 3 hours when that team wasn't working, which would like really disrupt kind of this very intricate schedule across the whole world and 5 companies. And also if something went wrong and like that team was offline, that would be very disruptive. So that's why they tried to do kind of one agent on a team at a time. I'm going to move on, but broadly happy to take more questions on like the specifics of the rollout if there are.
Oh, Lindsey, one quick question. So during this period, because it's also 2020, should we expect these agents to like stick next to each other, or they are kind of working from home alone? And more like generally, do you think this either we sit next to each other, interact with each other face by face, versus the other scenario, which is a lot of these customer service workers are mostly working from home individually? How do you think that also affects either the adoption or the impacts?
So in general, customer service workers during this time in the Philippines, they were continuing to work from office locations. And that's just simply because in the Philippines, sort of the average home work setup is not like super great for high broadband, excellent connections, so on and so forth. But in general, everyone was still working from the office. For the US agents, kind of in theory, there were some people who did change to working from home, but I think a lot of people still came in for the same reasons, because kind of the group of people who are working in call centers in the US are often fairly low income, and so just might not be able to do their job from their house. Call centers is a very individual, so like you do interact with your manager a lot, but often within the same team, you don't really have a ton of interaction. Your kind of time is very regimented. So I think this is probably not the right setting to think about like the team interaction effects, because it is such an individual production environment. But I will talk more about the manager interaction later, which is important. So this is going to set up our empirical strategy, which is just a staggered difference in difference. And basically, this is going to say, we're going to look at this period when the AI was slowly being rolled out. Our main outcome of interest is going to be the resolutions per hour. We are going to use the date when the AI suggestions were turned on for that agent, basically after the training session. And then, the AI suggestions can be turned on for the agent. That doesn't necessarily mean the agent is using any of this suggestion. So here it's this intent to treat analysis. And then we're going to control for a bunch of factors about the agent. So agent fixed effects, the months of tenure, other things depending on the setting. And then, of course, we're going to use estimators robust differential timing. For our resolutions per hour, we're going to have data at an agent month level, and also for the number of issues resolved and the customer satisfaction. That's all only going to be available at an agent month level. We're going to go down to the chat level when we do some more chat level analysis. And kind of the reason for that is, the reason for the agent month level is agents are paid an hourly wage, but a lot of 20 to 40% of their pay is performance bonuses on either call duration, issues resolved, and customer satisfaction. And so the data firm tracks that on the month level. Okay, said that before. So just to give you a sense of kind of the adherence rate, it's about 35%, which means 35 of AI generated suggestions are followed either exactly or very close to with some small editing. And this is actually very similar to adherence rates that you see in other Copilot settings like GitHub Copilot. Okay, so now just looking at some raw data, this red distribution is the relevant metric, upper left resolutions per hour, right handle time, that's basically how fast calls are handled. Bottom left is chats per hour, which incorporates the potential for multitasking, and then on the right, share resolved before AI access. And then the blue is after AI access, again, just looking at raw data here, and you can kind of see there does appear to be a shift in the distribution with the when AI is turned on. So we'll, of course, this could be some other selection going on, and so we'll analyze this more precisely. In column 1, we're looking at the impact of AI access on resolutions per hour. We're going to add controls for being treated. You can kind of see a fairly large increase. This is just levels. We're going to use levels here and then translate our results into percentage increases, just because so we avoid some of the issues with having 0 and in our output. In column 2, we're going to add agent fixed effects. It's our estimated effect is going to go down a little bit. And then in column 3, where we have agent year month, agent fixed effects, year month fixed effects, and controls for how experienced an agent is, we're going to find an increase in resolutions per hour of 0.3, which is equivalent to 15%. And this is going to be our main specification. This is the event study graph. It looks very similar. And, again, you can sort of estimate it a variety of ways. We get very similar results. Interestingly, in this setting, we really don't see differences between the OLS estimates and the staggered diff and diff results, which and we have additional evidence on. There really isn't differences in the effects by cohort. So like early, the first rollout, the profile effects actually doesn't differ that much from the last cohort of adopters. And we don't really see interesting. Not something we were expecting. So where are these improvements coming from? On the top left, this is just the average handle time, and the top right is chats per hour. And then what you can see the bottom is resolution rate and customer satisfaction, which are kind of flat. So what we're seeing here is on average, most of the improvements in productivity are coming on the efficiency side. So kind of the way we interpret this is like the kind of speed at which calls are handled goes up, and the satisfaction and resolution rates kind of stay flat. Now, how do these effects vary across workers? So one hypothesis that we had going in is the AI systems could complement higher ability workers. So kind of one, there's obviously prior evidence of skill bias in IT, but also kind of a really important thing here is that the AI is going to make a suggestion to a worker, and the worker is the one who needs to understand, should I follow this recommendation or should I not? And so you might expect that you have to have a little bit of experience to understand how to do that, when to do that. At the same time, one very unique aspect of these ML tools is they're just looking for patterns in training data. And so basically, it's just going to pick up patterns associated with success. So how top workers solve some technical problem, or maybe the way they speak to customers, and translating that into a suggestion. And so because the better workers kind of are already implementing the ML suggestions because they are the ones who are in the training data, maybe the AI isn't actually suggesting them new things. And so it's really the lower skill workers who benefit from access to these tools. So kind of like if, and in call centers, just as in many other industries, there are fairly large productivity differences between top and bottom workers. They're very persistent over time. And it's kind of hard, something that the call center industry has tried very hard to remove that or reduce that differential, but has not been very successful at. So like there are very clear differences between a top worker and a bottom worker. And so we're going to look at how these effects vary on two dimensions. One is skill, basically where a worker's relative skill index before the AI was rolled out, and then also their the tenure they were when they received access to the AI tool. And here, the experience is going to be very compressed just because the turnover is so high. So basically, like being, I think the average tenure is 8 or 9 months, just for context. So on this graph, which is, I'm going to show you a ton of versions of this graph. So I'm going to walk through this one. On the y-axis, we have the change in the resolutions per hour, just in levels. And then on the x-axis, on the left, we have the Q1 agents who are in the lowest quartile of skills before they received AI access within their firm. And what you can see is they have a very high impact. For agents, they see very high changes in their resolutions per hour when the AI is turned on. Moving forward, we have the Q2, so agents who are in the like 25th to 50th percentile of the skill distribution before AI. moving up to the best 20% of agents. And here you see really no impact of AI access for these agents. They are adhering to the suggestions at slightly lower rates than the less good agents, but this is very clear monotonic pattern. We can also look at this same pattern for our other outcomes. On the top, efficiency; on the bottom, resolution and customer satisfaction. Kind of what you'll see is that really across most of the outcomes, we see effects for the least good workers, no effects for the top workers. In fact, for the resolution rate and customer satisfaction, we actually see negative effects. And the way we think about those is that before AI, I kind of could take the time to like really craft an excellent response to a customer. But now I might just take the slightly worse AI response because it's less effort for me. And so that's kind of something we'll think about more. We're going to do the same thing for agent tenure. And so in the regressions I showed you, we're controlling for agents' experience. In these regressions here, we're going to control for agent skill. So we're looking at these are separate effects. And we're just going to break out the x-axis now by how experienced an agent was when they got access to the AI. So again, similar effects where for the less experienced agents, large increases in resolution per hour, really no impact for the most experienced agents, those with over a year experience. Looking at the outcomes again, we continue to see the same pattern. And then again, for the resolution rate and customer satisfaction, we do see those small negative effects on the most experienced agents. Again, kind of consistent with that story I told you earlier. So
I have a question. So can you, in the data, can you observe whether those agents really use the answer suggested by the AI, or you couldn't observe this information in the data? Because I was thinking, like for the newest agent, it's like a cheating. They just directly use the answer suggested by the AI. It's like for example, you give the AI to students. Maybe the no ability student just use the answer. They don't think it will, right? They directly copy the answer and they submit the answer too, right? So is that the case here?
So that's something we're calling the adherence rate. Basically, what is the share of recommendations an agent follows either exactly or with minimal editing? And it's around 35%. It is going to be slightly higher for the less skilled and less experienced agents, kind of like 40-ish, a little bit over 40%. And it's going to be slightly lower for the very most experienced, most skilled agents, but there are not huge differences. And so this cannot simply be explained by just, say, the top agents ignoring all recommendations, the good agents accepting all. That's not what we see.
Okay.
And so now kind of what exactly does this mean? So this blue line here is agents who never had access to the AI. This is just the natural relationship between tenure and productivity, kind of smoothly increases over time. Now the red line is agents who received AI access right when they started. And so what you can see is there's this very sharp difference in slope. They improve much more rapidly in terms of resolutions per hour. And it kind of ends just because their data ends. And so after 2 months, they're about as productive as someone without AI after like 9 months of experience. This green line, so for the first 6 months, these green line agents don't have access to the AI. They're given it here at 6 months, and you can see there continues to be this like difference in the relationship between tenure and productivity, which is suggesting that what the AI is doing is it's not just filling in kind of experienced things agents learn in their first months. It will continue to have an impact on productivity even later. And so what this is really doing here is it's kind of changing the relationship between experience and productivity at the firm. So previously, often you were paid as an agent for being your years of experience, or even your years of experience at a different firm, because obviously that means you're probably going to be more productive when you start. Here, that's kind of potentially impacting this. So it's kind of changing the value of experience. And then it's also usually agents spend the first 2 months in this kind of training period where their manager like gives them a lot of extra attention, extra hand-holding. You can imagine in this world where you have this very different productivity effect, you might want to rethink if you are the firm, you might want to rethink how that training occurs. Okay, so there are a bunch of robustness checks we might want to do with these sort of results. I'm just going to talk briefly through them and then say, I could talk about them offline or, read the paper. We can do a bunch of alternative specifications. We can do team by month fixed effects. We can instrument individual adoption with date of earliest team adoption. We can do different weighting. We can check for mean reversion. We can look at the randomized control trial. All are very similar to our mean results. Okay, so that graph that I showed you 2 slides ago with the productivity and experience relationship, often you call those learning curves. And so the question here is like, well, what exactly is happening? Like, are the workers really learning anything? Or if the AI was taken away, would we just see them kind of revert back to baseline? And so one hypothesis is the many examples that you see from the AI are actually helpful. They're like real-time feedback to the agent about like what you could do or should do in a situation. And in fact, the call center managers, their kind of main job is to have this weekly meeting with an agent where they review the agent's transcripts and are like, in this situation, you should have done X or Y or so on and so forth. But obviously manager coaching is, constrained by time and human capabilities, and it's not real time. And so one hypothesis is if the AI is helping workers learn, then AI exposed workers should do better even without AI access. Now, on the other hand, maybe this really is just blind copying. So kind of similar to the question, workers are just blindly following AI recommendations and develop no more human capital than they would otherwise, maybe even negative. They are sort of degrading their human capital. And so then the implication here is that AI exposed workers will do no better if the AI is taken away from them. And so we're going to try to compare what happens in these two settings. So unfortunately, we don't have a situation where the AI was turned off for all agents. So we're going to take advantage of periods of AI outages. So on the y-axis, this is the share of AI-enabled chats that don't get any AI suggestions. And the x-axis is just time. You can see there are kind of periods where there's chats where there's no suggestions, just kind of natural in the course of business. This is just because some chats are really fast. Some chats, like the AI actually doesn't have anything to say. But there's this really big spike to 100% right here. And this is just one of the software engineers was running a test on the AI system and crashed it. And so for a while, a couple of hours, the AI is not generating any suggestions for the agents who are working. And so what we're going to do is take advantage of those outage periods. And we're going to compare how agent performance of agents who should have access to the AI when they're not actually getting suggestions. And so we're going to go down to a chat level. And so our outcome is going to be call duration. On the left, I'm just running an event study, but the post period is only in weeks when the AI is working, which is kind of most of the time. And what you can see, there's this fairly sharp 5-minute decrease in call duration once the AI is turned on. On the right, I'm going to do the same thing, but only use post periods when there's an AI outage. So these are basically periods kind of similar to what I showed you earlier, where there's like some big software bug or AWS goes offline for some reason. And what you can kind of, this is obviously much noisier because we have a lot less sample. You kind of see in the first month, it doesn't really seem to be that AI exposed agents are faster when there's no AI suggestions. But kind of after about a month, we do actually kind of seems to be that agents continue to be slightly faster than they were without AI access. And this is kind of consistent with the idea that if the AI is kind of helping them pick up techniques that they wouldn't otherwise, it should take a little bit of time before we see that effect. So there's like kind of this dose response effect here. We can also sort of break out agents by their adherence. So there's some other work in education that suggests that basically if an AI system gives you a suggestion on how to do a math problem, really the important thing to helping students learn from that is to force them to like engage with the suggestion, to kind of edit it. If you just let them ask the AI for the answer, they won't learn. If actually the AI gives a wrong response, but there's some sort of Socratic nature to how the student interprets that response, they will actually still learn from the wrong answer. And so kind of with that in mind, we're going to break out agents during outage periods by those who were highly initially adherent, and those who were not low initial adherence. These are like bottom and top terciles, or bottom and top 50% of the distribution. And what you can see on the left is for the kind of highly adherent agents who are actually engaging with the suggestions, it does really seem to be, it's very noisy, but we do potentially see a persistent increase in call duration during outage periods, while for the agents who are kind of ignoring most of the suggestions, kind of really something that looks like a zero effect. And so this is suggestive that actually agents are kind of learning something from exposure to these suggestions, such that they continue to handle calls more efficiently, even when the AI isn't generating output. Okay, so then kind of moving on to assessing why, what exactly are agents learning? So I said before, the AI's learning patterns that are associated with success, the main challenge is we can't kind of open up the AI and sort of see the things that it's picking up. And so we're going to spend a bit of time assessing the chat text, which are basically this nice window into what workers are doing. And I'm going to talk about one specific worker skill that we know is very important, which is speaking very comprehensible and native-like English. So good call center agents communicate with both very comprehensible, so like grammatically correct, and also native-sounding English. And this is one of the reasons why the call center industry, particularly for US businesses that are serving US customers, has gravitated to the Philippines, because just due to some historical traditions, many Filipinos learn English very early and have excellent fluency, and so the call center industry has kind of gravitated there. In general, US customers kind of like people who like to speak with people who sort of seem like they're American, and so this is, for good or for ill, this is kind of like one important part of being a good worker. This is something that's kind of screened for very heavily in the employment process as well. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use the chat transcripts to measure two things. One is just comprehensibility, basically like how correct is this text? And then also native fluency, basically how does this sound like someone who speaks like functionally native, who understands like all the cultural nuances of being a native speaker. And this is based on this existing scoring system. And just to give you an example, something like saying, have a blessed day. That is grammatically correct, but that's not a common expression in the United States, but it actually is something the agents say quite a bit. Who are located in the Philippines say quite a bit, but it's not, it's not something you would hear like a US call center worker say. And on the left, I'm showing you the event study for the change in agent comprehensibility scores. This is like correctness. And on the right, change in native fluency. And what you'll see is, basically 0.2 something increases in both. This corresponds to about a 5% increase in the comprehensibility score, 6% increase in fluency score on average. But agents generally start off from a fairly high baseline. These are all scored from 1 to 5. But we see kind of big differences by whether agents are located in the Philippines, the Filipino agents, or the US agents. So there's a 3.5% increase in comprehensibility on the left among US agents right here, a 5.7 increase among Filipino agents. So Filipino agents are really benefiting from AI accesses, leading them to speak to express themselves in more correct English. And then similar effects on fluency, where there's a small increase among US agents, but a very big increase among the Filipino agents. And just for context, most of the US agents are located in the south of the US, so like Kentucky, Florida, Texas, basically places that have very, very low cost of living. And so here, this is an example of, no one explicitly trained the AI system to help to actually speak, comprehensible, fluent sounding English. That's just something it picks up on because that's associated with higher levels of customer satisfaction. And that's kind of something that we're seeing transmitted across agents. The other specific type of why we're seeing productivity effects are going to be about chat topic. So to do this, we're going to basically cluster all of our topics into one of these 50 topic descriptions. We do that with an LLM. I'm going to skip over that, how we do that now for time. But broadly, we get this very skewed distribution where most of the chats are either in payroll or taxes or account access or management, and there's just kind of a long tail of less common topics. So just there's one of the less common topics is, tax filing and payments, or conversions and data migration, basically getting data from one accounting system to another, or things like product activation and registration, like how do I activate my product or register it, so on and so forth. But most are in the payroll and account access. And we're just going to ask, how do the effects of AI access vary by chat topic with this regression? Our outcome is going to be call duration, just because we are at the chat level again. And then we're going to look at the effects by topic category. I do want to mention that, so top agents, if you kind of look at how quickly they answer calls, they're very good kind of across the distribution. The less good agents kind of struggle with they're less good at, say, the common topics, but not that much worse. They definitely struggle more with kind of the less common topics. As you would expect, over time, basically you have a greater frequency. If you're more experienced, you have a greater frequency of encountering some of the more unusual questions. Okay, so then basically this is kind of a similar graph. Again, the y-axis is the percentage change in call duration. I'm just translating these effects for you relative to control mean. The first coefficient is the payroll and account access category, so like the 50% of the call topics. The next 25% of topics, which kind of add the next 5 topics, such that we get up to 75% of the topic distribution. the kind of long tail, and then this last 10% of like really unusual topics. And broadly, what you see here is kind of fairly consistent declines where there is an effect of the most common topics, but there continues to be impacts even on the longer tail. And I think this is really due to the fact that we're examining the combination of the AI system and the human. So we know that AI systems basically improve with more data. So you might expect that the impacts on the payroll and account might be very large, but there's really less impacts as you go out down the distribution. But on the other hand, humans, the human workers who are being complemented here, also have experience. So most workers kind of have run into a payroll or account problem because they're so common. So there's like not that much scope for benefit with the AI for those very common topics. But at kind of the intersection of the two, even though the AI is actually going to be less good at some of the unusual topics, that's actually where the humans need more help. And so kind of this is what we think is behind the how we interpret the pattern we see here. Okay, so I'm gonna just mention one thing on the experience of work before I conclude. So this is kind of like what happens for the worker's life. How does their experience of being a call center agent change? It's a very stressful job. There's lots of turnover because it is very easy to get burned out. We're going to measure sentiment here of the conversations. On the left is customer sentiment, basically the tone of the conversation. It's kind of some very positive conversation, some very negative, kind of mean of 0, basically. The agent sentiment, it's all very positive. They're sort of trained to be very professional, so on and so forth. On the left side, I'm showing you the change in customer sentiment after the AI is rolled out. You can see actually very large effects. This is like a doubling of the average customer sentiment. Really no effect on agent sentiment, just they're already so positive. There's really no room to improve. And so basically, either through a combination of the agents are getting better, they're solving problems faster, or maybe some of those tone suggestions are helping them manage customer frustration better. Just the customer interaction is getting a lot more respectful. Kind of similarly, we can also track the number of times the customer is asking to speak to a manager. There's a 22% drop in those as well, sort of consistent with the customers becoming less frustrated. And I'm not going to show you this, but we see some suggestive effects that there's also a small decline in attrition, potentially just because the job is much less stressful. So with that, I will conclude. I think I've shown you that generative AI can increase productivity in this call center context. What we're seeing here is really a pattern of effects where mostly the less experienced and less able workers see those gains. And I think we've talked through a couple of examples about the mechanism by why this might be happening, why it might be sort of something that's true with these ML systems in a way that's not true with other ways of IT. And also just as agents get better at their jobs, kind of that changes the experience of the job for them in ways that potentially have effects on labor demand. As agents get up to speed faster or as attrition goes down, that can also have impacts on sort of the number of workers you need in an industry. I think broadly, this raises a couple of questions where the estimates that you see here correspond to being able to have 12% fewer worker hours. Does that actually happen in practice, or do agents like kind of upskill to more complicated tasks? Or is there a demand side effect as they get better at their jobs? And then raises questions on what are all the equilibrium effects of these sort of tools. So with that, thank you very much for your attention, and happy to hang around a bit for questions.
Thank you so much, Lindsey. It's amazing, especially with more and more discussions on AI these days. It's amazing that you already started studying this topic and also even run experiment early in 2020, which is super nice. That gave a lot of insights today that we can learn from. So given the timing, maybe we can open the floor to 1 or 2 questions. So anyone who wants to ask questions, please free to unmute themselves or raise the hand.
Hi, Lindsey.
Yeah, please.
I think it's a wonderful paper. It leads us to think about how AI how AI helps us in lots of work. But my question is that how much do you think that you can generalize this your conclusion to other scenarios?
Yeah. It's a great question. I think that one, the result on most of the productivity effects driven by the less experienced, less good workers, that has been kind of, there's a bunch of other papers that came out later that kind of replicated that finding across other contexts, not all contexts, but I think that seems to be something we see a lot. Particularly when looking at, we've seen this in software engineering or like people doing consulting tasks or, so I think that might be generalizable. I also think the learning results, some of the work, the follow-on work on education is actually seeing surprisingly interesting, robust effects. Basically, if you're able to design an AI such that it doesn't just give people the answer, even giving them the wrong answer actually seems to have effects on helping students learn questions like math. So I think that's really interesting. I think the question is like, would you see such large productivity effects in other settings? Call centers are nice because you do have so much training data. You do have very good outcomes. So you can build very good models. I don't know how that might be less generalizable to other settings. But I think some of the mechanisms about the learning effects and the pattern of productivity benefits seems to be generalizing across other contexts.
Thank you. It's just like that. It depends on how much human knowledge can be transferred to the lower part.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think you're totally right. If you sort of brought in people who had never done call center before and replaced the less skilled workers with them, you might not see those effects because they're actually very bad at understanding when to follow the AI versus not. And so I think, in a setting where you have a huge experience range or a huge skill range, you might not see that. That's a great point.
Thank you.
Hi, Lindsey. I also have a quick question about, so I'm a bit more curious about the design of the study. Because we know that, the big debate about AI is to what extent actually it replaces workers, right? It could complement, could also replace. And so in a way, I get this feeling that the study is restricted to position the AI tool to be augmenting or complementary. So I'm just curious, why don't you also have a setting or have a trial group say that let AI take over completely and see to what extent, the AI can handle all these customer queries by itself. And then, you may find that it complements workers, but at the same time, it also replaces workers.
Yeah. It's a great question. I think so. At the time we were running the study, particularly for these sorts of questions, which are fairly, it's a 40-minute on average conversation. There's lots of questions about taxes and, running payroll. The AI alone would not have been able to handle that. And so there was neither the AI firm nor the data firm was willing to say, let's just try an AI only solution because it just wouldn't have worked well at all. Since then, I think the models have gotten better. And so you can imagine a third group where there was AI only, but a human could jump in if the conversation got really out of hand. And I think that's something that is feasible now. And you could actually add a third arm set up like that. But at the time, it was just very clear that it was not going to go well if we did that.
Right. And I have another small question that's a bit more specific, because if I'm not mistaken, one of the finding was that for more high-skilled workers, you don't really find any, positive or significant result complementing, right? It may actually even have a negative impact. And I'm curious that, do you also have data on, or did you also try to give this AI tool to the supervisors? So presumably the supervisors, they are really the ones who are experienced. Because I think, in part, I think the other question I had is also similar to what was raised before, because I could argue that all the workers from the customer service industries, they are by and large more low skilled. Sure, you have heterogeneity within the workers, but if you look at cross sector setting, I mean, I would classify the entire sector to be rather mid-low skills, right? So I guess if you also examine to what extent this AI tool could complement or it may reduce the performance of the supervisors, I think that might be a bit more convincing.
So I think kind of two things. So one, sometimes when other work has looked at cross occupation, we use low and high skill to denote often high school degree, college degree, or often college degree. And obviously here we're looking at a single occupation, studying workers within that occupation. In the US, actually, many of the workers are, don't necessarily have a college degree or are like doing this on the side while they're in school, maybe community college, stuff like that. In the Philippines, many of these workers do have college degrees because in the Philippines, working in a call center is kind of a good job. But I think broadly, this work is not designed to speak to cross-occupational questions. It's obviously done within one occupation. How this shakes out along kind of that dimension is not something we can speak to here. One point about the supervisors. So the supervisors, they really have a different job than the call center agents. Their only job is to help, do those one-on-one meetings with the workers, review transcripts, so on and so forth. So you can think about the AI tool as helping the supervisors do their job because it's basically doing this real-time kind of feedback or suggestions based on the conversation. So in that way, it is augmenting the supervisors. And anecdotally, we got a lot of evidence that the manager's job they kind of spend time doing different things when the AI is in there because they're not spending most of their time like reviewing transcripts. They're kind of like doing a little bit more in-person interaction, maybe with the agents, making sure the AI is working, et cetera. But the negative part about the supervisors is their jobs are not well tracked because they're not handling customers. They're doing, normal kind of like white collar work. And so it's very hard to understand from a data perspective how their job changes. I think that's one of the most interesting next questions that comes out of this is how does this change like the hierarchy within a workplace and those questions, but we can't really do that here.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, I also have a very related follow-up question, which is I think this project highlights all these amazing results on productivity, but on the other hand, it also shows a decrease in return to experience. So how should we think about this? For example, does the company have an incentive to redesign the wage system? For example, whether they pay lower for experienced workers and more, and how this may affect the worker retention in general? Because it seems like even just for up to 2 months, the young workers catch up with the experienced workers.
Exactly.
So does this mean that workers may change their jobs more so that they kind of exposure to like people love variety so that they expose to many industry, but actually they are as good as experienced workers?
Yeah. That's something we're trying to do follow-up work on is basically follow the workers over time as they transition to other jobs, basically see if there's evidence of effects along those lines. But we kind of mostly focus on the productivity results here. I think it's almost because those results are such a change, it's almost certain that there will be effects. One thing we did here is that kind of many of these performance pay bonus are specific targets. So like hitting some measure for call speed or resolutions per hour. But when everyone gets better, the companies often would just like ratchet up that performance target. So like the total amount of money they pay out in performance bonuses doesn't increase. And so it's like very unclear about whether these productivity effects actually made the workers better off because probably they were paid about the same with the ratchet effect. And I think that's, you know, that's like not also that's a really interesting story to get more evidence on, like how did these productivity effects actually translate into worker welfare, but not something we did in this paper.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Like maybe follow up studies that we.
Exactly.
Sounds good. Yeah. Okay, if there's no more questions, then we thank you again, Lindsey, for joining us today and present this amazing work. And thanks everyone for being here and for the great discussions. And we look forward to seeing you all in the future and the upcoming seminars and activities. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.